The sharp crack of glass cut through the cabin. Terrell Washington's iPad lay shattered on the floor, his reflection splintered across the ruined screen. "These people don't know how to behave in first class," sneered Richard Keller, straightening his suit like a judge delivering sentence. The 12-year-old sat frozen humiliation burning hotter than fear until a shadow fell across them both. A tall man in a navy suit stood at the aisle's edge, his voice calm but cold. "These people," he repeated softly. The passengers turned, and in that instant, the balance of power shifted, because Terrell's father wasn't just any man. He was the airline's next investor. 12-year-old Terrell Washington couldn't contain his excitement as he walked through Oakland International Airport alongside his father. His fingers traced the smooth edge of his brand new iPad Pro, a reward for maintaining straight A's throughout the school year, despite the challenges of remote learning during the pandemic. "Dad, I can't wait to show you the coding program I've been working on," Tyrell said, his wide brown eyes shining with enthusiasm. "I think it could be a game-changer for your presentation tomorrow." Marcus Washington, 40 years old and CEO of Washington Technologies, smiled down at his son with unmistakable pride. Standing at 6'2" with broad shoulders and a confident stride, Marcus commanded attention wherever he went. Today, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit, he looked every bit the successful executive he was. "I'm looking forward to it, son," he replied, placing a protective hand on Tyrell's shoulder. "But remember, this trip isn't just about work. After my meeting with the investors, we've got tickets to the Tech Museum of Innovation, and I promised you a tour of Silicon Valley." Washington Technologies had risen rapidly in the tech industry over the past 5 years, developing innovative accessibility software that was revolutionizing how people with disabilities interacted with digital platforms. Marcus had built the company from scratch after leaving a prestigious position at a major tech corporation, determined to create something that would make a difference while building a legacy for his son. As a black man in the overwhelmingly white tech industry, Marcus had faced countless barriers and microaggressions throughout his career. He worked tirelessly to shield Terrell from similar experiences, though he knew he couldn't protect him forever. Their comfortable life in the hills of Oakland, their beautiful home, and Terrell's enrollment in an exclusive private school provided some buffer. But Marcus never allowed his son to become complacent about the realities they faced as Black Americans. "Boarding pass and ID," please, the gate agent requested when they approached. Her eyes widened slightly as she processed their first-class tickets, a subtle reaction Marcus had grown accustomed to over the years. "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Washington," she said, handing back their documents with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. As they settled into the spacious first-class cabin, Terrell bounced slightly in his plush leather seat by the window. "First time in first class?" asked a flight attendant named Janet as she passed by, her tone slightly condescending. "No, ma'am," Terrell answered politely, just as his father had taught him. "We fly first class whenever we travel for Dad's business." Janet's tight smile faltered for a moment, before she moved on to welcome other passengers. Marcus noticed the interaction, but chose not to comment, not wanting to cast a shadow over Terrell's excitement. The cabin filled gradually with business travelers, many of whom glanced twice at the black father and son in the premium cabin. Marcus was accustomed to these looks, but he noticed Terrell shrinking slightly in his seat, becoming more self-conscious as the minutes passed. Just as the final boarding announcement sounded, Marcus's phone buzzed with a call from his chief financial officer. The upcoming presentation to potential investors at Pinnacle Investments was crucial for their expansion plans, and last-minute changes to their financial projections needed Marcus's approval. "Terrell, I need to take this call. It's about tomorrow's meeting," Marcus explained, unbuckling his seatbelt. "I'll move to the back where I won't disturb anyone. Will you be okay here for a few minutes?" Tyrell nodded, already immersed in his iPad. "I'll be fine, Dad. I'm just going to work on my program." Marcus squeezed his son's shoulder reassuringly before moving toward the back of the plane, finding a quiet corner in the empty row of the last section. The call was urgent. Their lead investor had questions that couldn't wait, and Marcus needed privacy to discuss sensitive financial details. He had no way of knowing that this brief absence would leave Terrell vulnerable to what would happen next. Richard Keller rushed onto the plane with the harried impatience of someone accustomed to the world, adjusting to his schedule, not the other way around. At 53, the vice president of Pinnacle Investments carried himself with the entitled confidence of a man who had spent decades in positions of power. His silver hair was expertly cut, his Italian suit impeccably tailored, and his leather briefcase bore the discreet logo of a luxury brand. What wasn't visible to casual observers was that Richard's position at Pinnacle had recently become precarious. After a series of investment missteps that cost the company millions, he had been effectively demoted, retaining his title, but losing much of his decision-making authority. This San Francisco trip was his chance to identify promising new ventures that might restore his standing with the board. As he made his way down the aisle to his seat in first class, Richard's already sour mood darkened further when he spotted Terrell sitting in the window seat next to his assigned place. The sight of a young black boy in the premium cabin triggered an immediate reaction, a tightening of his jaw, a narrowing of his pale blue eyes. "Excuse me," Richard said, his voice clipped as he hovered by the row. "I think you might be in the wrong section." Tyrell looked up from his iPad, momentarily confused. "No, sir. This is seat 3A. That's what's on my boarding pass." Richard's nostrils flared slightly as he stowed his briefcase in the overhead compartment. "First class, really?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implication. "Yes, sir," Tyrell responded quietly, shrinking into his seat. Richard settled in beside him with a heavy sigh, making a show of checking his watch and adjusting his seat to claim as much space as possible. The armrest between them became contested territory as Richard's elbow encroached on Tyrell's side. "Unbelievable," Richard muttered, just loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. "They let anyone up here these days. No standards anymore." A woman across the aisle shot Richard a disapproving glance, but remained silent. An older gentleman in the row ahead turned slightly, then thought better of it and faced forward again. Tyrell focused intently on his iPad screen, trying to make himself invisible, a skill he developed at his predominantly white school. He turned down the volume on his educational coding game, even though he was wearing headphones, hyper-aware of his every movement. Janet, the flight attendant who had greeted them earlier, approached with pre-takeoff beverage options. "Something to drink before we depart?" she asked, addressing Richard first with a warm smile. "Scotch neat," Richard replied, without looking up from his phone. Janet nodded and turned to Tyrell. "And for you, we have juice or water?" Before Tyrell could answer, Richard interjected. "Do you really need to ask? He's clearly a child. Just bring him an apple juice and be done with it." "Actually, I'd like water, please," Tyrell said softly. Janet barely acknowledged his response, already writing down apple juice on her service pad. "We'll be taking off shortly," she informed them, moving to the next row. As the plane prepared for departure, Richard made a call, speaking loudly about billion-dollar acquisition targets and restructuring opportunities. When the announcement came to switch off electronic devices, he continued his conversation for another full minute before reluctantly ending the call. He then turned his attention to Tyrell's iPad. "You need to put that away for takeoff." "I know, sir. I'm just saving my progress," Tyrell explained, fingers quickly tapping through the shutdown sequence. After takeoff, when electronic devices were again permitted, Tyrell cautiously returned to his iPad, opening an educational programming app his father had installed to help him develop his coding skills. The app included subtle sound effects that escaped through his headphones occasionally. Richard shifted irritably in his seat. "That noise is distracting," he complained, though the cabin was filled with the much louder sounds of the engines and other passengers' conversations. "I'm sorry," Tyrell apologized reflexively, turning down the volume even further. Richard leaned toward the boy, invading his personal space. "What are your parents thinking, letting you travel alone in first class?" "I'm not alone," Tyrell explained. "My dad is Janet," Richard called out, interrupting Tyrell and beckoning to the flight attendant. When she approached, he adopted a concerned expression. "I believe we have an unaccompanied minor here. Shouldn't he be under airline supervision?" Janet looked at Tyrell with sudden suspicion. "Are you traveling by yourself, young man?" "No, ma'am," My father is on the plane. He just stepped to the back to take a business call. Janet's eyes narrowed. First-class passengers should remain in the first-class cabin during flight. He'll be back soon. Terrell assured her discomfort evident in his voice. Janet left with a promise to check on the situation, while Richard settled back with a satisfied smirk. Rules are rules, kid. This isn't a playground. Terrell remembered his father's words from countless conversations about navigating hostile situations. Keep your dignity. Don't let them see they've affected you. Your worth isn't determined by their perception. Taking a deep breath, he straightened his posture and continued working on his iPad, determined not to let this man's pettiness derail his project or dampen his spirits. But Richard Keller was just getting started, and the worst was yet to come. 30 minutes into the flight, the seatbelt sign flashed on with a soft chime. The captain's voice crackled through the cabin speakers, warning of anticipated turbulence as they passed through a weather system over Nevada. Flight attendants hurriedly completed their beverage service before securing the carts. Janet approached their row with Richard's requested scotch and a plastic cup of apple juice, not the water Tyrell had asked for. She placed Richard's drink carefully on his tray table with a cocktail napkin. "Your scotch, Mr. Keller," she said with practiced difference before turning to Tyrell. "And juice for you, young man." "Thank you. But I asked for Tyrell," began politely. The plane suddenly lurched downward. Janet stumbled slightly and the plastic cup of juice tipped over, splashing across Richard's tray and dripping onto his light grey suit pants. "For God's sake!" Richard bellowed, jumping to his feet despite the illuminated seatbelt sign. "Look what you've done." Tyrell froze wide-eyed. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't. My suit costs more than everything you're wearing." Richard snarled, dabbing furiously at the spreading stain with the tiny cocktail napkin. "This is Italian wool, you little." He caught himself before completing the slur, glancing around at the watching passengers. Janet rushed to assist, offering a handful of napkins. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Keller. Let me help you clean that up." "It wasn't my fault," Terrell said quietly, his voice steady, despite his racing heart. "The turbulence. You should have been holding your cup." Richard cut in his face, flushed with anger. "Basic flight etiquette. But I wouldn't expect you to know about that." The implication hung heavy in the air. A middle-aged woman across the aisle cleared her throat disapprovingly. "It was actually my fault," Janet interjected, though her apologetic smile was directed solely at Richard. "I should have secured the drink better." She turned to Terrell with a much cooler expression. "Perhaps you should be more careful with beverages during flight." Terrell nodded silently, fighting the hot pressure building behind his eyes. He would not cry. Not here. Not in front of these people. The turbulence subsided, but Richard's anger did not. He continued muttering about his ruined suit and the declining standards of air travel as he attempted to blot the stain. His elbow repeatedly bumped against Terrell's arm, forcing the boy to press himself against the window to avoid contact. Seeking refuge in his programming project, Tyrell returned his attention to the iPad. The coding interface filled the screen as he focused on debugging a particularly challenging section of his accessibility application, a project inspired by his father's company mission. Richard glanced over his irritation, visibly increasing as he watched Tyrell work. "Put that thing away," he demanded. "Excuse me?" Tyrell looked up, genuinely confused. "Your little game." "It's distracting me. I have important work to review before landing." "It's not a game," Tyrell explained carefully. "It's a coding program. I'm working on a project for—" "I don't care what it is," Richard interrupted. "The light from the screen is giving me a headache." "Put it away." Tyrell hesitated, torn between his ingrained politeness and the knowledge that he wasn't violating any airline rules. "I'm sorry you're uncomfortable, sir, but electronic devices are allowed during flight." "I'm not doing anything wrong." Richard's face darkened. He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a threatening whisper. "Listen, kid. I don't know what you think you're doing in first class, but up here we respect each other's space and comfort." "I am respecting your space," Terrell replied, summoning the quiet confidence his father had cultivated in him. "I'm wearing headphones. I've turned down the brightness, and I'm staying entirely in my seat area despite your elbow taking up the armrest." A businessman across the aisle poorly disguised his chuckle as a cough. Richard's neck reened at the perceived humiliation. "That's it," he snapped, reaching across Terrell without warning. "Give me that iPad. I'll return it when we land." "No." Terrell pulled the device away, holding it against the window. "You can't take my property." Richard's hand closed around the edge of the iPad. "Don't make a scene, boy. Please let go," Tyrell said, his voice rising slightly. "This was a gift from my father." Their struggle attracted attention throughout the first-class cabin. Several passengers watched with uncomfortable expressions, but no one intervened. Janet observed from the galley, making no move to defuse the situation. "This is ridiculous," Richard growled, yanking harder. "Give it to me now, or I'll call the flight attendant and report you for disruptive behavior." "I'm not being disruptive," Tyrell insisted, maintaining his grip on the device. "You're the one grabbing my things." With a final forceful tug, Richard wrenched the iPad from Tyrell's grasp. But instead of keeping hold of it, he deliberately released it mid-air. The device clattered to the floor, the distinctive sound of cracking glass piercing the cabin's ambient noise. A collective gasp rose from nearby passengers. Tyrell stared in disbelief at his shattered iPad, the screen now a web of fractures, the case dented from impact. In the shocked silence that followed, Richard stood over the broken device, his face twisted with contempt. "These people don't know how to behave in first class," he announced loudly, as if addressing an agreeable audience. "No home training whatsoever." The flight attendant's expression transformed from passive observation to sudden alarm. Her eyes fixed on a point beyond Richard, widening with recognition. Marcus Washington stood in the aisle, his imposing frame rigid with controlled fury as he surveyed the scene. His son's shattered iPad, the smug businessman, and his son's devastated expression. "These people," Marcus repeated, his deep voice cutting through the tense silence. "I believe you owe my son an apology, sir." Absolute silence engulfed the first-class cabin. Every passenger seemed to hold their breath as Richard Keller slowly turned to face Marcus Washington. The contrast between them was stark. Richard's face flushed with anger, and now a flicker of apprehension, while Marcus maintained a composed exterior that barely contained the fury evident in his eyes. "Your son Richard," replied, his voice losing some of its previous confidence. "Well, he was being disruptive with that iPad. Proper etiquette dictates." "Proper etiquette," Marcus interrupted, his voice dangerously calm, "dictates that you don't touch other people's property, especially a child's. It also dictates that you don't use phrases like these people when referring to fellow passengers." Tyrell remained frozen in his seat, staring down at his broken iPad. The screen he had been working on just moments ago. Lines of code representing weeks of work now displayed nothing but fractured glass reflecting the cabin lights. His hands trembled slightly as he carefully collected the larger pieces from the floor. Janet, the flight attendant, who had been so dismissive of Tyrell earlier, now approached with an entirely different demeanor. "Mr. Washington," she said, her voice honeyed with sudden recognition. "I'm so sorry about this situation. Can I get you anything? Perhaps a complimentary beverage, or what I need? Marcus cut in is for you to document this incident properly. My son's property has been deliberately damaged by another passenger, accompanied by language that I consider discriminatory." Janet's professional smile faltered. "I'm sure Mr. Keller didn't intend. I was right here when it happened," a woman interrupted from across the aisle. She was in her 40s with sharp eyes and an air of authority. She held up her phone, and I have most of it on video, including the comment about these people not knowing how to behave. Several other passengers nodded in agreement, some holding their phones as well. In the age of viral videos documenting injustice, many had instinctively begun recording when the confrontation escalated. Richard glanced around, suddenly aware of the multiple cameras that had captured his behavior. His expression shifted from righteous indignation to calculated damage control. "Look, there's been a misunderstanding," he said, lowering his voice and attempting a conciliatory tone. The turbulence caused some juice to spill on my suit, and I may have overreacted to the situation. I apologize if I came across as racist, suggested the woman across the aisle. Because that's exactly how it came across. Richard's jaw tightened. I am not racist. I simply expect certain standards of behavior in premium cabins, regardless of who. Stop talking, Marcus advised him quietly. You're only making it worse. Janet hovered uncertainly between them. Perhaps we could all take our seats for now. We still have about 40 minutes before landing in San Francisco. I'll return to my seat, Marcus agreed. But I want this incident documented properly. And I want to speak with the captain and a customer service representative when we land. He turned his attention to Tyrell, his expression softening as he crouched beside his son's seat. Are you all right? Tyrell nodded stoically, though his eyes betrayed his distress. My project, he whispered. All my code was on there. We'll recover it, Marcus assured him, squeezing his shoulder gently. Your work is backed up to the cloud. Remember, nothing is lost except the device, and that can be replaced. As Marcus settled into the empty aisle seat next to Tyrell, a passenger had quietly offered to switch so the father and son could sit together. Richard remained standing uncertain of his next move. So you need to take your seat. Janet finally instructed him, gesturing to an empty spot several rows ahead. We'll sort this out after landing. Richard complied wordlessly, gathering his belongings and moving forward, acutely aware of the judgmental gazes following him. Once Richard was reseated, the woman who had recorded the incident leaned across the aisle toward Marcus and Tyrell. I'm Elaine Foster. She introduced herself quietly, offering a business card. Civil rights attorney. What happened here wasn't okay, and I'd be happy to advise you on your options if you'd like. Marcus accepted her card with a grateful nod. Thank you, Miss Foster. I appreciate that. As the flight continued towards San Francisco, whispered conversations filled the cabin. Several passengers came forward to express their support to Marcus and Tyrell, offering their contact information as potential witnesses. Others shared their own experiences with discrimination while traveling, creating an unexpected community of solidarity at $30,000 FT. What do you think about what just happened on this flight? If you believe Richard was completely wrong for his actions, comment number 1. If you think the flight attendant should have intervened sooner, comment number 2. And if you're wondering how Marcus will handle this situation when they land, comment number 3. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories about standing up against discrimination. Now, I have a question for you. Have you ever witnessed racial discrimination in a public place and wished someone would step in? What would you have done in this situation? The story continues as the plane lands in San Francisco, and we're about to see how Marcus Washington, CEO and father, responds to this injustice. Will he seek immediate compensation, pursue legal action, or find another way to address what happened to his son? Let's find out. As the plane began its descent into San Francisco International Airport, Marcus Washington maintained a composed exterior while his mind methodically assessed the situation. Years of navigating hostile corporate environments as a black executive had honed his ability to strategize under pressure. This wasn't just about a broken iPad. It was about dignity, respect, and showing his son how to respond to injustice with strength and purpose. Can I see the videos you recorded? Marcus asked quietly to Elaine Foster and 2 other passengers who had offered their footage as evidence. They passed their phones to him one by one. Marcus watched each clip carefully, his expression revealing nothing, as he witnessed Richard Keller's actions from multiple angles. The footage was damning. Richard clearly grabbing the iPad from Tyrell's hands and deliberately dropping it, followed by his contemptuous remark about these people. Thank you, Marcus said, returning the phones. Would you be willing to share these files with me? They might be important. The passengers readily agreed, exchanging contact information with Marcus. As Janet observed from a distance, her earlier confidence noticeably diminished. Mr. Washington. She finally approached, her voice significantly more respectful than when she had addressed Tyrell earlier. The captain would like to speak with you after we land. We take incidents like this very seriously." "I'm sure you do." Marcus replied, his tone neutral but pointed. "I noticed how seriously you took it when my son was being harassed before I returned." Janet's face flushed. There was turbulence, and I thought you thought my son was traveling alone, and therefore an easy target Marcus finished for her. Or perhaps you assumed he didn't belong in first class. Either way, you failed in your responsibility to ensure the safety and comfort of all passengers, not just those you deemed worthy of your attention. Janet's professional mask slipped completely. "Sir, I would never." "Your actions speak for themselves," Marcus interrupted firmly. "We'll discuss this further with your supervisors after landing." As Janet retreated to the galley, Marcus turned his attention to Terrell, who had been quietly examining his damaged iPad. "I'm sorry about your device, son," he said gently, "but I'm proud of how you handled yourself. You remained dignified in a difficult situation." Terrell looked up, his expression troubled. "I tried to be polite like you always tell me, Dad, but nothing I did mattered." "He just saw the color of your skin." Marcus finished, when Terrell's voice trailed off. "Some people will never see beyond that. No matter how well you speak, how politely you behave, or how accomplished you become. That's their limitation, not yours." Tyrell nodded slowly, processing his father's words. "What happens now, all?" Marcus said, a hint of strategic determination entering his voice. "We turn this unfortunate incident into a teachable moment for Mr. Keller, for the airline, and perhaps for others too." The plane touched down at SFO, taxiing smoothly toward the gate. As other passengers prepared to disembark, Marcus noticed Richard Keller gathering his belongings with unusual haste, clearly planning to be the first off the aircraft. "Sir," the lead flight attendant approached Richard. "I'm afraid we need you to remain seated. Airport security has been notified about the incident, and they'd like to speak with you before you proceed to your connection." Richard's face palled. Security. That's absurd. This was a minor dispute, nothing more. "I have an important meeting to attend." "Be that as it may." The flight attendant replied firmly. "You'll need to speak with security first." As the seatbelt sign turned off, most passengers remained seated, watching the drama unfold. Richard glared at Marcus across the cabin. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill," he called out. "It was just an iPad. I'd be happy to pay for a new one if that's what this is about." Marcus stood buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate calm. "This isn't about the iPad, Mr. Keller. This is about accountability." Something in Marcus's voice caused Richard to look more closely at him. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, followed by visible alarm. "Washington," he said uncertainly. "Marcus Washington of Washington Technologies." Marcus nodded, once his expression unchanged. "That's correct." The color drained from Richard's face completely. "You're presenting to our investment committee tomorrow." "I'm on that committee." A murmur rippled through the watching passengers as this connection became clear. The confrontation had just become significantly more complicated. "Yes, I'm aware," Marcus replied evenly. "Pinnacle Investments is one of several firms I'm meeting with during our funding round. I believe you're the Vice President of Acquisition Strategy. Correct?" Richard swallowed hard, the implications of his actions suddenly taking on new dimensions. "This is just an unfortunate coincidence. I had no idea who you were, who your son was, and that makes your behavior acceptable." Marcus questioned, his voice carrying throughout the now silent cabin. "If my son had been anyone else's child, it would have been okay to discriminate against him, destroy his property, and use racist language. I didn't. I wasn't," Richard stammered, looking desperately around the cabin for support, and finding none. Two uniformed airport security officers appeared at the aircraft door, directed by the captain. "Mr. Keller, we need you to come with us, sir." As Richard was escorted from the plane, he made one last attempt to salvage the situation. "Washington, be reasonable. I'll replace the iPad. I'll even throw in an apology. There's no need to let this misunderstanding affect our professional relationship." Marcus didn't respond, simply watching, as Richard was led away protesting about overreaction and political correctness gone mad. Once Richard had departed, Janet approached Marcus again, this time with the captain beside her. "Mr. Washington, I'm Captain Reynolds." The pilot introduced himself. "I want to personally apologize for what happened on my aircraft today. We have zero tolerance for discrimination of any kind." "I appreciate that," Captain Marcus replied, "but policies are only as effective as the people enforcing them. Your flight attendant observed the entire situation and chose not to intervene until I appeared a 6.2 adult male rather than a 12-year-old boy who needed her protection." Janet looked at the floor, unable to meet Marcus's steady gaze. "That will be addressed," Captain Reynolds assured him. "We'd like to offer you complimentary tickets as compensation for your experience today." "I'm not interested in free tickets," Marcus stated firmly. "What I want is systemic change. Your crew needs better training on recognizing and responding to discrimination. That would be a more meaningful outcome than a voucher." As they began to disembark, Elaine Foster fell into step beside Marcus and Terrell. "That was impressively handled," she commented. "Most people would have lost their temper in that situation." "Losing my temper wouldn't serve my son or my purpose," Marcus replied. "But make no mistake, I'm angry. I'm just channeling that anger productively." Elaine smiled appreciatively. "As you should. By the way, I wasn't completely forthright earlier. I'm not just a civil rights attorney. I specialize in cases involving discrimination in public accommodations and transportation, and I've been looking for a test case to push for broader policy changes in the airline industry." Marcus considered her words carefully. "I'm listening. What happened today wasn't an isolated incident," Elaine explained as they walked through the jet bridge. "It's part of a pattern that affects thousands of travelers who don't have your resources or platform. Together, we could use this situation to create meaningful change." Before Marcus could respond, they emerged into the terminal where a group of airline representatives and airport officials waited, clearly prepared for damage control. Mr. Washington, a woman in an airline executive uniform, stepped forward. "I'm Victoria Pearson, Customer Experience Director. We'd like to speak with you privately about today's unfortunate events." Marcus glanced at Tyrell, then at Elaine, making a quick decision. "My son and I have had a long day, Miss Pearson. We'll be heading to our hotel now. My attorney will be in touch to discuss next steps." He handed Elaine one of his business cards, an unspoken agreement passing between them. "Dad," Tyrell said quietly, as they walked away, "that man from the plane. He's going to be at your meeting tomorrow." He was supposed to be Marcus confirmed, but I suspect his employers might have different plans for him once they review what happened today. As they exited the terminal, neither of them noticed Richard Keller watching from a distance, his face dark with resentment as he spoke urgently into his phone, calling in favors, making threats, and desperately trying to control the narrative. Before the videos went public and his career suffered irreparable damage. What neither Richard nor the Washingtons realized was that the first clip had already been uploaded and the hashtag #FirstAssRacism was beginning to trend. The arrivals level of San Francisco International Airport hummed with the usual cacophony of reunions, taxi calls, and rolling luggage. Marcus and Terrell Washington stood slightly apart from the crowd, awaiting the black Tesla that would transport them to the Grand Hyatt downtown. Despite his outward composure, Marcus remained hyper-vigilant, his protective instincts heightened after the incident on the plane. Terrell clutched the damaged iPad in its case, his shoulders still tense from the confrontation. "Dad," he said quietly, "those airline people are following us." Marcus glanced discreetly behind them. Victoria Pearson, the airline's customer experience director, was indeed approaching with two colleagues in tow, their faces set with professional determination. "Mr. Washington," Victoria called, quickening her pace. "Please, just 5 minutes of your time." Marcus placed a steadying hand on Terrell's shoulder. "Miss Pearson, I believe I was clear about my intentions. This isn't the appropriate time or place." "I understand your position," Victoria persisted, "but we'd like to resolve this situation before it escalates further." She lowered her voice. "Videos of the incident are already appearing online. For everyone's benefit, including your son's, wouldn't a private resolution be preferable?" Marcus's expression hardened. Are you suggesting that protecting my company's public image should outweigh my concern for my son's dignity, that I should quietly accept compensation and disappear? Victoria backpedaled quickly. That's not what I meant. We take this incident extremely seriously. And excuse me. The authoritative voice came from behind them. A uniformed airport security officer approached, accompanied by two individuals in business attire with TSA identification. I'm Officer Reynolds. We've received multiple reports about an incident aboard Flight 1142. We'd like to take statements from all involved parties. Victoria's colleagues exchanged concerned glances. One stepped forward, presenting a business card. Thomas Reeves, General Counsel for the airline. Perhaps we could arrange for statements to be given tomorrow. Mr. Washington and his son have had a trying experience. I'm afraid this is standard procedure for incidents involving potential assault or destruction of property. Officer Reynolds replied firmly. We'll need statements while the events are still fresh. Marcus nodded. We're happy to cooperate with security. My son and I have nothing to hide. They were escorted to a private room in the airport's security area where they found Richard Keller already seated, looking considerably less confident than he had on the plane. His expensive suit was rumpled, his face flushed with indignation. This is outrageous, Richard declared as they entered. I'm being treated like a criminal over a minor dispute. Destruction of property valued over $1,000 isn't considered minor under California law. Mr. Keller replied, a serious-looking woman who introduced herself as Agent Morales from the TSA. Now we'd like to hear each person's account of what happened. Over the next 40 minutes, statements were taken from Marcus, Terrell, and Richard. Security personnel also collected contact information from several passengers who had witnessed the incident, including Elaine Foster, who provided her legal perspective along with her video evidence. The videos make the situation quite clear. Agent Morales noted, after reviewing the footage on various passengers' phones, Mr. Keller, you deliberately took and damaged property belonging to a minor. It wasn't deliberate. Richard insisted, his voice rising with frustration. The boy was being disruptive with his device. I merely attempted to confiscate it temporarily, and it slipped from my grasp during turbulence. That's not what the videos show. Officer Reynolds countered, replaying a clip that clearly captured Richard's deliberate action. And several witnesses reported hearing you make comments with racial overtones immediately afterward. Richard's face reened further. Those comments have been completely misinterpreted. I was referring to children in general, not making any statement about race, Mr. Keller. Marcus interjected calmly. We both know exactly what you meant by these people. Your attempt to reframe your words now only compounds the insult. Richard shifted uncomfortably, then abruptly changed tactics. Look, he said, reaching for his wallet. I'm willing to compensate you for the damaged iPad. $5,000 should more than cover the replacement cost and any inconvenience. He pulled out his checkbook with a flourish. Let's put this unfortunate misunderstanding behind us. The room fell silent as Marcus regarded Richard with an expression of measured contempt. Mr. Keller. Marcus finally responded, his voice deliberately controlled. You seem to believe that money can solve this problem, that you can purchase immunity from the consequences of your actions, just as you've likely done throughout your life. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. But there are some things that money cannot buy. Respect, dignity, the right to exist in public spaces without being harassed because of the color of your skin. These are things my son deserves inherently, not privileges to be granted or withheld at your discretion. Richard scoffed, though his confidence appeared to be wavering. You're being melodramatic. This was about behavior, not race. Was it? Marcus challenged. Would you have demanded that a white child put away his iPad? Would you have physically taken it from his hands? Would you have made remarks about these people afterward? Before Richard could respond, Elaine Foster stepped forward, addressing the security officers. As an attorney familiar with similar cases, I should note that Mr. Keller's actions potentially violate federal laws prohibiting discrimination in public accommodations, including air transportation. His attempt to resolve this with a payoff could be interpreted as an admission of liability. Richard's lawyer, who had joined them midway through the proceedings, placed a warning hand on his client's arm. "Mr. Keller will be making no further statements at this time." Agent Morales nodded, closing her notebook. "We have enough information for our report. Mr. Washington, you have the option of pressing formal charges for the property damage if you wish." All eyes turned to Marcus, whose expression remained thoughtful as he considered the question. Tyrrell watched his father, intently uncertain of what decision would be made. After a moment of deliberation, Marcus spoke. "I believe there are more productive ways to address this situation than through criminal charges." However, he added, his gaze shifting to Richard. "That doesn't mean there won't be consequences." Richard's relief at avoiding immediate charges was short-lived. As Marcus continued, "Mr. Keller, you're an executive at Pinnacle Investments, one of the firms I'm scheduled to pitch to tomorrow. I wonder if your colleagues and shareholders would appreciate how you conduct yourself in public, particularly when you believe no one of consequence is watching." The blood drained from Richard's face. "You wouldn't? I wouldn't what?" Marcus asked innocently. "Share truthful information about your character with your associates. Why wouldn't I? Isn't due diligence an essential part of any potential business relationship?" Victoria Pearson, who had been quietly observing, chose this moment to intervene. "Mr. Washington, the airline is prepared to offer significant compensation for your experience today. Full refunds, unlimited future travel." "What I want," Marcus interrupted firmly, "isn't free tickets or a refund. What I want is for my son to see that there are consequences when people abuse their power. I want your airline to implement mandatory amphibious training for all customer-facing staff. I want clear protocols for responding to discriminatory behavior on your flights." He turned to Tyrrell, whose expression had shifted from distress to cautious pride as he listened to his father speak. "Most importantly, I want my son to know that his dignity isn't negotiable and that standing up for yourself doesn't always mean meeting aggression with aggression." Victoria hesitated, clearly unprepared for these specific demands. "I don't have the authority to commit to policy changes of that magnitude, but I can certainly bring your concerns to our leadership team." "I'll expect a formal response within 1 week," Marcus stated, rising from his chair. "My attorney will follow up." As they prepared to leave, Richard made one final desperate attempt. "Washington, be reasonable. I've apologized. I've offered compensation. What more do you want from me?" Marcus paused at the door, considering the question, carefully understanding he finally answered. "Not just words of apology, but genuine comprehension of why your actions were harmful. The recognition that my son deserves the same respect, the same benefit of the doubt, the same human dignity that you expect for yourself without question." He looked directly into Richard's eyes. "But I'm not holding my breath. People like you rarely change until staying the same becomes too costly." With that, Marcus guided Tyrrell from the room, leaving Richard to face the uncomfortable scrutiny of everyone who remained. As they walked toward the terminal exit, Elaine Foster fell into step beside them. "That was masterfully handled," she commented. "Most people would have either taken the money or pursued charges. Neither option would have taught Tyrrell what I wanted him to learn today." Marcus replied that there's power in standing your ground without losing your composure. That demanding systemic change is more valuable than personal compensation. Elaine nodded appreciatively. "So what happens tomorrow with your Pinnacle presentation?" A slight smile crossed Marcus's face. "That depends entirely on how Pinnacle chooses to handle Mr. Keller's behavior. Their response will tell me everything I need to know about whether they're investors I want to work with." As they reached the curb where their Tesla waited, Tyrrell finally spoke up. "Dad, do you think anything will actually change?" Because of what happened today, Marcus placed both hands on his son's shoulders, meeting his gaze directly. "I don't know, son. Change is hard and slow. But I do know this. Nothing changes if we accept mistreatment as inevitable. Every time we stand up, we create possibility. And sometimes that's enough to start something important." As their car pulled away from the curb, neither of them noticed Richard Keller emerging from the terminal, his phone pressed to his ear as he engaged in what appeared to be a heated conversation with someone who held power over his future. The consequences had already begun. The Grand Hyatt San Francisco offered a stunning panoramic view of the city from its upper floors. In room 3204, that vista of twinkling lights and iconic landmarks went largely unappreciated as Marcus Washington sat at the elegant desk, his laptop open before him, completely restructuring the presentation he would deliver to potential investors. The next morning, on one of the queen beds, Tyrell lay on his stomach, a hotel notepad in front of him, sketching out ideas for rebuilding his damaged app. His broken iPad sat on the nightstand, a visual reminder of the day's events. Though he appeared focused on his work, Marcus noticed his son's occasional distant gaze, the slight furrow in his brow that indicated his mind was elsewhere. Tyrell, Marcus said gently, swiving his chair to face his son. "Let's talk about what happened today." Tyrell looked up, his expression carefully neutral, a mask Marcus recognized because he'd taught his son to wear it in certain situations. The realization sent a pang through his chest. "I'm okay, Dad," Tyrell responded automatically. "Just thinking about how to rebuild my project." Marcus moved to sit on the edge of the bed. "I know you better than that. What's really going on in that brilliant mind of yours?" The practiced composure crumbled slowly as Tyrell sat up, crossing his legs beneath him. "I keep thinking about how different it would have been if you weren't who you are." His voice was barely above a whisper. "If you weren't Marcus Washington's CEO, if you were just a regular black dad." The observation hung in the air, weighted with insight beyond Tyrell's 12 years. Marcus felt a complex mixture of pride in his son's perceptiveness and sorrow that such awareness was necessary. "You're right," Marcus acknowledged, after a thoughtful pause. "My position gave me leverage in that situation that many others wouldn't have. The respect I received from the airline, from airport security, even from Richard Keller, came partly because of my title, not just because my cause was just." Tyrell nodded, his eyes downcast. "So what does that mean for kids like me whose parents aren't CEOs, or for people who don't fly first class? Do they just take it? Accept being treated that way?" Marcus moved closer, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "That's why those of us with privilege and power have a responsibility to push for change that helps everyone, not just ourselves. Individual victories aren't enough." He reached for his phone, opening the browser to show Tyrell something. "Look at this. The video from the plane has over 200,000 views already. Number first-class racism is trending." Tyrell's eyes widened as he scrolled through comments from people sharing similar experiences, expressing outrage and debating solutions to the systemic problem of discrimination in transportation. "This is bigger than just us now," Marcus explained. "And that's good. Individual incidents get forgotten. Movements create change." A notification appeared on Marcus's phone. An email from Gerald Hammond, CEO of Pinnacle Investments. Marcus opened it immediately, his expression revealing nothing as he read the contents. "What is it?" Tyrell asked anxiously. Marcus handed him the phone. The message was brief but significant. "Mr. Washington, ***, I've been made aware of an incident involving our VP, Richard Keller, on your flight today. I want to personally assure you that his behavior does not reflect Pinnacle's values. I would still very much like to hear your presentation tomorrow, and I believe we have much to discuss beyond potential investment opportunities. Mr. Keller will not be in attendance. Sincerely, Gerald Hammond, CEO, Pinnacle Investments, They're still going to let you present." Tyrell observed with relief. "And that Richard guy won't be there." "It's a start," Marcus agreed. "But I'm more interested in what actual consequences he'll face, not just whether he's excluded from one meeting." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Marcus checked the peephole before opening it to reveal a hotel staff member with a cart bearing covered dishes. "I didn't order room service," Marcus said, puzzled. "Compliments of Miss Foster in room 2918, the attendant explained. She asked that you call her when convenient." After the attendant departed, Marcus and Tyrell discovered a selection of San Francisco's finest comfort food. Sourdough bread clam chowder in bread bowls and Ghirardelli chocolate for dessert. A note from Elaine read Times. Thought you both deserve something restorative after today's stress. Call me when you're ready to discuss strategy. Asterisk. As they ate, Marcus's phone began buzzing with notifications. The first was a voicemail from Janet, the flight attendant, offering a personal apology and explaining that she had been reflecting deeply on her own biases. The second was a text from Victoria Pearson, indicating that the airline CEO wanted to speak with him personally the next day. Most significantly, a notification appeared showing that Richard Keller's LinkedIn profile had been updated. His title at Pinnacle Investments had changed from Vice President Acquisition Strategy to simply Senior Advisor. They demoted him, Tyrell noted, peering at the screen. Is that enough? That depends, Marcus replied thoughtfully. If it's just about saving face publicly, while nothing really changes behind the scenes, then no. But if it's the first step in a genuine commitment to addressing bias within their organization, it could be meaningful. After dinner, Marcus called Elaine to discuss their approach moving forward. He put the call on speaker so Tyrell could listen and learn. The airline's in damage control mode, Elaine informed them. They've reached out to me 3 times already, offering increasingly generous settlements if you'll sign an NDA. I'm not interested in being silenced, Marcus stated firmly. I suspected as much, Elaine replied, approval evident in her voice, which is why I've drafted a different kind of proposal. Rather than monetary compensation, it outlines specific policy changes, mandatory Antibius training, clear protocols for handling discrimination incidents, diverse hiring initiatives, and an advisory board with community representatives to evaluate their progress. Marcus nodded appreciatively. That's exactly the direction I want to go. Send it over and I'll review it tonight. After ending the call, Marcus noticed Tyrell had grown quiet again, staring out at the city lights with a troubled expression. What's on your mind, son? He asked gently. Tyrell turned to face him, his eyes reflecting a mixture of vulnerability and determination. All my life you've protected me. Our house in the hills, my private school flying first class, you've built this bubble around me. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But today, that bubble burst, and I realized I'm not prepared. The words struck Marcus like physical blows. Despite all his efforts to educate his son about the realities of being black in America, while simultaneously shielding him from the worst of it today, had shown him that perhaps he had failed at both. What happened on that plane, Tyrell continued. It wasn't just about an iPad. It was about me not being seen as human as worthy, and I didn't know what to do. His voice cracked slightly. I wanted to be strong like you always are, but inside, I just felt small. Marcus moved to sit beside his son, placing an arm around his shoulders. Tyrell, listen to me. First, I am so proud of how you handled yourself today. You showed incredible restraint and dignity in a situation where many grown men would have lost their composure. He turned Tyrell to face him directly. Second, I need you to know something important. I'm not always strong. There have been countless times when I've felt exactly what you felt today. Small, powerless, diminished by someone else's perception of me, based solely on my skin. Tyrell looked up in surprise. Really, even now? Even now, Marcus confirmed. The difference isn't that I don't feel those things. It's that I've learned not to let those feelings determine my actions or define my worth. He reached for his wallet, removing a worn photograph of a much younger Marcus standing proudly outside a small computer repair shop. This was my first business, started with a loan from your grandfather, and operated out of a tiny storefront in Oakland. My very first client was a white man who took one look at me and demanded to speak to the owner, not believing I could possibly be qualified to fix his expensive equipment. Tyrell studied the photo with newfound interest. What did you do? I swallowed my anger, fixed his computer better than anyone else could have, and used his payment to buy parts for the next repair, Marcus explained. Then I did it again and again, building a reputation that eventually made my race irrelevant to my success in that community. He squeezed his son's shoulder. But here's the important part. I never forgot how that felt. And with each step up I took, I made sure to create space for others to follow. to make the path a little easier for the next person. Tyrrell nodded slowly, processing his father's words. So tomorrow with your presentation tomorrow isn't just about securing investment for Washington Technologies, Marcus confirmed. It's about using our position to create change that reaches beyond us. That's the true measure of success, Tyrrell. Not just how high you climb, but how many you bring along with you. As the conversation drifted to other topics and the night deepened, Tyrrell eventually fell asleep, the emotional exhaustion of the day finally catching up to him. Marcus returned to his laptop, making final adjustments to his presentation while occasionally glancing at his sleeping son. The original pitch had been impressive, detailed projections, innovative technology, solid growth strategies. The revised version retained all those elements, but now opened with something more personal. A photograph of the broken iPad and a straightforward account of the day's events, followed by statistics on discriminatory incidents in transportation and public accommodations nationwide. The message was clear. Washington Technologies wasn't just seeking investment. It was seeking partners who understood that technological innovation must be accompanied by social responsibility. Companies that addressed only the former while ignoring the latter would ultimately fail to reach their full potential in an increasingly diverse global market. As Marcus finally prepared for sleep, his phone buzzed with one final notification. A text message from a number he didn't recognize. Read Times, Mr. Washington. This is Gerald Hammond. I've reviewed the videos from today's incident. I'd like to meet privately before tomorrow's presentation. There are things about Pinnacle you should know, and things about myself I'd like to share. 7:00 a.m. at Blue Bottle Coffee *. Marcus typed a simple reply. Times I'll be there * before setting his alarm and turning out the light. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for the first time since the incident on the plane, he felt a cautious optimism that something meaningful might emerge from the day's pain. Outside their window, San Francisco continued its nighttime rhythm, unaware that in one hotel room, a father and son were navigating a personal journey that reflected America's larger ongoing struggle toward justice and equality. At precisely 6:55 a.m., Marcus Washington pushed through the door of Blue Bottle Coffee, the rich aroma of freshly ground beans enveloping him. The cafe was already bustling with early morning patrons, most absorbed in laptops or newspapers. In a corner booth, a distinguished man in his 60s sat alone and untouched cappuccino before him. Gerald Hammond, CEO of Pinnacle Investments, rose as Marcus approached. Unlike Richard Keller's performative power displays, Hammond carried himself with a quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. His handshake was firm, his gaze direct. Mr. Washington, thank you for coming, Hammond said, gesturing to the seat across from him. I appreciate you making time, especially after yesterday's unfortunate events. Marcus nodded, settling into the booth. I was intrigued by your message. You mentioned there were things about Pinnacle I should know. Hammond's expression grew serious. Yes, but first I want to personally apologize for Richard Keller's inexcusable behavior. The videos I've seen are disturbing to say the least. Apologies are appreciated, Marcus replied carefully. But I'm more interested in actions than words. As you should be, Hammond acknowledged. He pulled out his phone, showing Marcus an email with an official company letterhead. This went out to all Pinnacle employees this morning. Richard has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation, and we're implementing mandatory diversity and inclusion training effective immediately. Marcus scanned the document, noting its concrete commitments and clear timeline. That's a start. But corporate training programs often serve as window dressing without addressing underlying cultural issues. Hammond leaned forward, lowering his voice slightly. Mr. Washington, there's something personal I want to share with you. Something few people at Pinnacle know. He pulled out his wallet and removed a small photograph, sliding it across the table. The image showed Hammond with his arm around a beautiful black woman, both beaming with joy. Between them stood two teenagers with mixed features that clearly identified them as their children. My wife Denise and our kids Jasmine and Marcus. A small smile crossed Hammond's face. Yes, my son shares your name. A coincidence I noticed when your proposal crossed my desk. Marcus studied the photo with newfound interest, understanding dawning. Your family doesn't appear in any of Pinnacle's corporate materials. No. Hammond confirmed a flash of something like shame crossing his features. Early in my career, I was advised to keep my family private, to avoid complicating client relationships. Over time, that privacy calcified into something closer to concealment. He reclaimed the photo, looking at it with regret. I've told myself it was to protect them from scrutiny, but watching that video of your son yesterday forced me to confront a harder truth, which is Marcus prompted that my silence has been complicity. Hammond stated plainly, I've built influence within the financial world, but have done too little to use that influence to change the culture that made such privacy seem necessary in the first place. Men like Richard Keller have thrived in that culture. Marcus nodded slowly, reassessing the man before him. So where does that leave us with today's presentation? Hammond straightened, shifting to a more business-like demeanor. Your technology is impressive. That hasn't changed. But after yesterday, I'm equally interested in your vision beyond the bottom line. The investment committee will still want to see the numbers, but I hope you'll speak candidly about the values driving your company as well. I've adjusted my presentation accordingly, Marcus assured him, checking his watch. Speaking of which, we should head over. I asked my son to join us this morning. I hope that's not an issue. Not at all, Hammond replied, standing and leaving cash for both their coffees. In fact, I think it's essential he be there. 40 minutes later, Marcus and Terrell stood outside the imposing glass headquarters of Pinnacle Investments. Tyrell, dressed in a junior version of his father's tailored suit, clutched his portfolio containing notes on his coding project, now reinstalled on a new iPad that Marcus had procured from the hotel's business center. Nervous, Marcus asked, noticing his son's tense posture. A little Till admitted, "What if that man Richard is in there?" "Mr. Hammond assured me he won't be," Marcus said reassuringly. "But even if circumstances change, remember what we discussed last night. Your worth isn't determined by anyone else's perception." Terrell nodded, squaring his shoulders with newfound determination. "I'm ready." The Pinnacle conference room exuded wealth and power floor, to ceiling windows showcasing the San Francisco skyline. A massive mahogany table gleaming under recessed lighting and walls adorned with abstract art, undoubtedly chosen for its investment value as much as its aesthetic appeal. 7 people awaited them. 5 men and 2 women, all dressed in the understated expensive attire that signified their status in the financial world. Gerald Hammond sat at the head of the table, rising to make introductions as Marcus and Tyrell entered. "Everyone, this is Marcus Washington of Washington Technologies and his son Tyrell. As you know, we're considering a significant investment in their accessibility software platform." Handshakes were exchanged, though Marcus noticed several surprised glances at Tyrell's presence. As they settled into their seats, the door opened once more. Richard Keller entered, his expression a carefully composed mask of professionalism. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees instantly. Hammond's face darkened with displeasure. "Richard, I believe I made it clear you wouldn't be attending this meeting." "My apologies, Gerald," Richard replied smoothly. "But as Vice President of Acquisition Strategy, I felt it was my duty to be present for a potential investment of this magnitude." His gaze flickered briefly to Marcus and Tyrell before returning to Hammond. "Personal matters aside, I still have a responsibility to Pinnacle shareholders." Before Hammond could respond, Marcus rose calmly. "Actually, I'm glad Mr. Keller is here. It saves me from having to explain the context for my revised presentation." Richard's confident expression faltered slightly as Marcus connected his laptop to the room's projection system. The screen illuminated with the Washington Technologies logo, followed by a title slide that read, "Innovation with Integrity Technology that Serves Humanity." "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice measured and authoritative. "Washington Technologies creates software that makes digital platforms accessible to users with disabilities. Our mission has always been about removing barriers technological barriers that prevent full participation in our increasingly digital society. He clicked to the next slide, which displayed the shattered iPad from yesterday's incident. A collective intake of breath sounded around the table. Yesterday, my son and I encountered a different kind of barrier, one that no lines of code can dismantle. On our flight to this meeting, Tyrell was subjected to discrimination harassment and ultimately the destruction of his property, all because he was perceived as not belonging in first class. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Marcus continued outlining the incident without embellishment, allowing the facts to speak for themselves. Several committee members glanced at Richard with barely concealed dismay. "I tell you this not to embarrass Pinnacle Investments or to seek sympathy," Marcus clarified, "but because it directly relates to why our companies might or might not be compatible partners." The next series of slides detailed Washington Technologies, impressive growth metrics, market penetration, and revenue projections, the traditional content expected in such presentations. But interwoven with these figures were statements about the company's commitment to diversity in hiring community initiatives in underserved areas and testimonials from users whose lives had been transformed by their accessibility. "Software technology without conscience is just machinery," Marcus stated, approaching the presentation's conclusion. "At Washington Technologies, we believe that innovation must be guided by values, or it risks perpetuating the very inequalities it claims to address." He clicked to his final slide, which posed a simple question. Who are we building the future for? This is the question that drives every decision at our company, Marcus explained. If the answer is everyone, then our development teams, our leadership, and yes, our investors should reflect the diversity of that everyone. If Pinnacle shares this vision, we could build something remarkable together. As Marcus concluded, a heavy silence fell over the room, broken only when Tyrell raised his hand tentatively. "May I say something?" he asked. Hammond nodded encouragingly. "Please do, young man." Tyrell stood opening his portfolio. "I've been developing an app that extends my dad's accessibility software for kids with learning disabilities. Yesterday, when my iPad was broken, I lost the prototype I'd been working on for months." He displayed his notepad showing the sketches and code fragments he'd recreated overnight. "But I started over because I remembered what my dad always says, setbacks are opportunities for improvement. So I've added a new feature based on what happened yesterday." With surprising poise, Tyrell explained how his updated design now included a reporting system for users to document discrimination incidents they experienced while using technology in public spaces, creating data that could help identify patterns and drive systemic change. Because it's not just about fixing the technology, he concluded earnestly, it's about fixing how people treat each other when they use it. The room erupted in spontaneous applause, with several committee members visibly moved by the young developer's resilience and insight. Only Richard remained stone-faced, his complexion alternating between pale and flushed as he realized the extent of the damage to his position. As the applause subsided, Hammond turned to Richard. "I think we've heard enough. Richard, I'll need to see you in my office immediately after this meeting." His tone left no doubt about the seriousness of the conversation to come. The question and answer session that followed was robust and substantive, focusing not just on financial projections, but on the ethical dimensions of Washington Technologies' work. Throughout the discussion, Marcus noted with satisfaction that the committee members were engaging with both the business case and the social impact of the potential partnership. As the meeting concluded, Hammond approached Marcus and Tyrell while the others filed out. Richard had already departed, summoned to an immediate meeting with Human Resources. That was unlike any presentation I've seen in this room. Hammond admitted genuine admiration in his voice. "Most pitches appeal to our greed. Yours appealed to our humanity." "Is that enough to secure your investment?" Marcus asked directly. Hammond smiled. "The committee will vote this afternoon, but I can tell you unofficially, I haven't seen them this energized about a potential partner in years." But more importantly, he added, turning to Tyrell, "I'd like to introduce you to my children this weekend. I think my Marcus would be particularly interested in your app development work." As they prepared to leave, Hammond handed Marcus a folder. Our formal offer pending committee approval. You'll find it's 20% above what you initially proposed. Marcus raised an eyebrow. That's generous. It's strategic, Hammond corrected. We're not just investing in your technology. We're investing in your vision. And after what I witnessed today, I believe that vision is worth every penny. Outside the Pinnacle building, father and son paused on the sunlit sidewalk, both processing the morning's events. Do you think they'll really change anything? Tyrell asked skeptically. Are they just doing damage control because of the videos? Marcus considered the question carefully. Probably a bit of both initially. Real change takes time and sustained effort, but creating the right incentives, financial incentives, can accelerate that process. He smiled at his son. Your app idea might do more to drive that change than all the corporate training programs in the world. As they walked toward their next appointment, neither noticed the figure watching them from an upper floor window of the Pinnacle building. Richard Keller, clutching a cardboard box containing the personal items from his office. His expression a complex mixture of resentment and the first glimmerings of something that might eventually become self-reflection. 1 month later, the grand ballroom of the Fairmont San Francisco Hotel buzzed with anticipation. Camera crews from major networks adjusted their equipment, while journalists from technology and business publications claimed prime positions near the stage. On a massive screen behind the podium, the Washington Technologies logo alternated with a new emblem, the Dignity and Travel Initiative. Behind the scenes, Marcus adjusted his tie, while Tyrell, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, reviewed his note cards one last time. Nervous? Marcus asked, recognizing the same focused expression he often saw in himself before major presentations. Not nervous, Tyrell replied thoughtfully. Just want to get it right. This matters. Marcus smiled with pride. In the months since the incident on the plane, he had watched his son transform, not just recovering from the trauma, but channeling it into purpose. The shy boy who had once been content to code quietly in his room had discovered his voice as an advocate. A coordinator approached with a 5-minute warning. Marcus placed a hand on Tyrell's shoulder. Remember, son, speak from your heart. Your experience is powerful precisely because it's yours. Tyrell nodded, straightening his posture. I'm ready, Dad. As they moved toward the stage entrance, they passed Janet, the flight attendant, from their fateful journey. Now dressed in civilian clothes, she shifted awkwardly from foot to foot until Tyrell noticed her. Miss Janet, he acknowledged politely. Tyrell, Mr. Washington. She began, her voice thick with emotion. I wanted to thank you for inviting me today. The training program has been eye-opening. I've had to confront things about myself that weren't easy to face. Marcus studied her, noting the genuine contrition in her expression. Growth is rarely comfortable, Miss Janet. Your willingness to participate in the program speaks volumes. Janet nodded earnestly. I'll be sharing my perspective during the panel discussion. I want other flight crews to understand that what we might dismiss as just doing our job can cause real harm when influenced by unconscious bias. As they parted ways, Tyrell whispered to his father, Do you think she's really changed, or is this just for show? Time will tell, Marcus replied pragmatically. But people deserve the chance to demonstrate growth through actions, not just words. That's part of the accountability we're advocating for. The lights dimmed, signaling the event's commencement. Gerald Hammond took the stage first, his authoritative presence commanding immediate attention from the assembled crowd. Good afternoon, he began surveying the packed ballroom. 1 month ago, a disturbing incident occurred on a flight to San Francisco. An incident that could have remained just another statistic in the long history of discrimination in travel. Instead, thanks to the courage and vision of the Washington family, it has become a catalyst for industry-wide transformation. Hammond outlined the partnership that had formed between Pinnacle Investments, Washington Technologies, and 3 major airlines to create the Dignity and Travel Initiative, a comprehensive program combining technological solutions, policy reforms, and accountability measures to address discrimination in transportation. I'm proud to announce that Pinnacle is committing $100 million to this initiative over the next 5 years. Hammond declared, prompting appreciative murmurs from the audience. But more importantly, we're committing to examining and transforming our own corporate culture. He paused, his expression becoming more personal. For too long, I allowed my family to remain invisible in my professional life, fearing that my mixed-race marriage and biracial children might complicate business relationships. That silence was its own form of complicity in systems that preserve privilege for some while excluding others. Hammond gestured toward the audience where his wife and children sat publicly, acknowledging them perhaps for the first time in his corporate career. No more hiding. No more separate worlds. The future we're building must include everyone, not just as consumers of our products and services, but as full participants in their creation. As Hammond introduced Marcus, the applause was enthusiastic. Marcus approached the podium with his characteristic blend of confidence and humility. "Thank you, Gerald," he began. "When I boarded that flight 1 month ago, I was focused on securing investment for Washington Technology's next phase of growth. I had no idea that growth would take us in such an unexpected direction." Marcus detailed how the Dignity and Travel Initiative would work, combining Washington Technology's accessibility software with new reporting mechanisms for discrimination incidents, transparent accountability measures for transportation companies, and financial incentives for achieving diversity benchmarks. This isn't just about addressing isolated incidents, Marcus emphasized. It's about recognizing that discrimination in travel is a systemic problem requiring systemic solutions. Technology alone can't solve it, but technology combined with policy reform, education, and meaningful accountability can create the framework for lasting change. He then introduced Terrell, who approached the microphone with remarkable composure for a 12-year-old, addressing hundreds of industry leaders and journalists. "My name is Terrell Washington," he began clearly. "1 month ago, I was just a kid excited about flying to San Francisco with my dad. Then a man decided I didn't belong in first class because of how I look." Tyrell recounted the incident without embellishment. His straightforward narrative more powerful than any emotional appeal could have been. He described not just what happened, but how it felt, the helplessness, the humiliation, and ultimately the determination that had grown from the experience. "But this story isn't about what happened to me." Tyrell continued, his voice gaining strength. "It's about what happens to thousands of travelers every day who don't have viral videos or CEO fathers to help them seek justice. It's about the flight attendants who lack proper training to recognize and address discrimination. And it's about the bystanders who see something wrong but don't know how to safely intervene." He held up his new iPad, displaying the app he had developed. "That's why I created Report an application that allows users to document discrimination incidents in real time, providing secure storage of evidence connection to legal resources and anonymous reporting to transportation companies. This technology, combined with Washington Technology's existing accessibility platform, will help create accountability across the entire travel industry." The audience responded with enthusiastic applause as Terrell demonstrated the app's features, showing how it could be used not only to report incidents, but to track their resolution and identify patterns across companies and locations. As Tyrell concluded his presentation, he revealed the most surprising announcement of the day. "And finally, I'm proud to introduce the person who will be leading our community outreach for the Dignity and Travel Initiative." A familiar figure walked onto the stage. Richard Keller, noticeably humbled in appearance compared to the arrogant executive from the plane. The audience murmured in surprise, many recognizing him from the viral videos. Richard approached the microphone with visible discomfort. "Thank you, Tyrell. I never expected to be standing here today, and certainly not in this capacity." He paused, gathering himself. "What you witnessed on that video was not a momentary lapse, but a reflection of unconscious biases I've harbored throughout my career. Biases that were allowed to flourish in corporate cultures that prized profit over people and status over substance." He described his journey over the past month, from administrative leave to termination, from public disgrace to reluctant self-examination. "I lost my position, my reputation, and nearly my family as a result of my actions. But what I gained was infinitely more valuable. The beginning of awareness. Richard explained how he had enrolled in intensive bias training therapy and community service in predominantly black neighborhoods. I approached the Washingtons to offer yet another apology, expecting nothing. Instead, Marcus proposed something radical that I use my experience as a teaching tool for others in positions of privilege. Marcus returned to the podium as Richard stepped back. "We didn't make this decision lightly," he clarified. "Mr. Keller's involvement isn't about redemption or forgiveness. Those aren't ours to grant. It's about effectiveness. Who better to reach executives, investors, and others in positions of power than someone who has walked in their shoes and confronted the consequences of unchecked privilege?" Janet was then introduced as part of a panel of transportation employees, helping to develop and implement new training protocols. She spoke candidly about her own biased treatment of Terrell and the defensiveness she initially felt when confronted with it. It was easier to believe I was just following procedure than to admit I was treating this child differently because of his race. She acknowledged the training we're developing focuses not just on rules, but on recognizing these moments of discretion where bias often operates unchecked. As the formal presentation concluded and the networking reception began, media representatives swarmed around Marcus and Terrell, eager for sound bites and photo opportunities. Among them was a reporter from a major business publication who asked the question on many minds. "Mr. Washington, some would say, you've turned a personal incident into a lucrative business opportunity. How do you respond to critics who might view this initiative as capitalizing on your son's trauma?" Before Marcus could answer, Tyrell stepped forward. "My trauma lasted one day," he said firmly. "For many people, discrimination is a daily reality, with no end in sight. If my experience can help change that, then something good will have come from something bad. Isn't that what progress looks like?" The reporter nodded, clearly impressed by the young man's poise and perspective. Across the room, Gerald Hammond introduced his son Marcus to Terrell. The two boys quickly falling into animated conversation about coding and app development. Their fathers exchanged knowing glances, a new friendship forming that represented the bridge building they hoped to achieve on a larger scale. Later that evening, as the event wound down, Marcus and Terrell stood together in a quiet corner of the ballroom, taking in the success of the launch. "We did it, Dad," Tyrell said, exhaustion and exhilaration mingling in his voice. "You did it," Marcus corrected, immense pride evident in his expression. "Your courage made this possible." Terrell shook his head. "Not just me. It was the passengers who recorded videos. Elaine, who offered legal help. Mr. Hammond, who listened instead of defending his employee automatically." "You're right," Marcus acknowledged thoughtfully. "Change requires a constellation of actions, not just a single star." As they prepared to leave, Marcus noticed the broken iPad now mounted in an elegant display case positioned prominently near the ballroom entrance. Below it, a simple plaque read, "From broken to building." How a single act of discrimination launched a movement for dignity in travel. Back at Washington Technologies headquarters the following day, the framed iPad was installed in the lobby, serving as both a reminder of the incident that had sparked their new initiative and a symbol of their ongoing commitment to creating technology that addressed human needs beyond mere convenience or profit. Terrell, who had taken a leading role in the Youth Advisory Board for the Dignity and Travel Initiative, sat in his father's office reviewing feedback from the launch event. His new confidence was evident in his posture, his voice, and the way he engaged directly with the corporate leaders who now sought his input. "You know what the best part is," he remarked to his father. "When I was sitting on that plane watching my iPad shatter, I felt powerless. But now that moment has become a source of power, not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been made to feel they don't belong." Marcus nodded, understanding completely. That's the paradox of injustice-confronted son. What was meant to diminish you becomes fuel for growth when you refuse to accept it as the final word. The phone rang another media request for interviews about the initiative which had generated international attention. As Marcus took the call, Tyrell turned to his tablet, refining the code for his app's next update. The broken pieces had indeed become building blocks not just for a technology platform, but for a movement with the potential to transform how dignity was preserved and protected in public spaces across America. What would you do if you witnessed discrimination, like what happened to Tyrell? Would you stand up and speak out record evidence like the passengers did, or support the person being discriminated against in another way? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this story powerful, please subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Remember, change happens when we all recognize our power to make a difference, whether we're CEOs, flight attendants, or 12-year-old app developers. Thank you for watching, and until next time, remember that dignity isn't a privilege, it's a right that belongs to us all. This powerful story teaches us that confronting racism requires more than individual resilience. It demands systemic change. When Marcus Washington chose not to accept a simple apology or financial compensation, he demonstrated that true justice comes through transformation of the structures that enable discrimination. The story shows how privilege operates on multiple levels. Richard's behavior reflected his assumption of superiority, while Janet's complicity revealed how institutions often reinforce bias through selective enforcement of rules. Even Marcus acknowledged that his status as a CEO gave him leverage that others might lack. Yet the most profound lesson comes from Tyrell's journey. Initially traumatized and questioning his worth, he transformed his pain into purpose by creating technology that could help others. His app represents the perfect synthesis of personal healing and social responsibility. We also learned that accountability doesn't always mean punishment. By involving Richard in the initiative, Marcus showed that genuine change requires the participation of those who have perpetuated harmful systems. True justice isn't about revenge, but about creating conditions where discrimination becomes less likely for everyone. Finally, the story reminds us that standing by silently makes us complicit. The passengers who recorded evidence and offered support showed that everyone has a role in creating a more just society. Have you ever witnessed racism in public spaces like Tyrell experienced? What was your response? Comment below with your story, and let's start an important conversation about how we can all be better allies in these situations. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help more people discover it. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about overcoming discrimination and creating positive change in our communities. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the impact of casual racism, or anyone who has experienced discrimination and needs to know they're not alone. Your simple act of sharing could be the catalyst for someone else's journey toward healing and advocacy. Thank you for being part of our community that values human dignity above all. Until our next story, remember that when we stand together against injustice, we create ripples of change that can transform entire systems. Stay compassionate, stay engaged, and stay committed to making a difference.